Hi everyone, my name is John Gold, and I want to say something about yesterday's shooting in New Zealand. Before I begin, I want to send my condolences to everyone affected by yesterday's act of terrorism. I am so sorry that it happened. Now, after 9/11, I was hateful towards Muslims and Arabs. I wanted revenge for what happened. If you've read my first book, you'll know that I wanted to carpet bomb the Middle East and make it into a parking lot. I have since learned that that way of thinking is horrid. We are all human beings, as I've said in previous videos, and no one should be dehumanized. What we should have done after 9/11 was put the brakes on in this country, figured out what happened and who was responsible, and then figure out what we were going to do about it. But that's a story for a different time. Because I felt so hateful, just as hateful as any racist against Muslims and Arabs, I especially feel for them now that I know better. I've been fighting against Islamophobia for a long time now. I wrote an article once called 9/11 Was Not a Muslim Crime. I'm going to read part of that article to you now. This was written on October 25th, 2010. Quote, Muslims did kill us on 9/11, and there is a Muslim problem in the world. If you want to walk away from that truth, I can't stop you, but a better strategy would be for all of us to acknowledge the danger coming out of the Muslim world and work together to mitigate it. End quote. That was Bill O'Reilly. I have written on this topic a couple of times. My basic belief is that 9/11 was not an act of war and instead a crime. Not a Muslim, Zionist, American, Episcopalian crime, a crime. If people who happen to be Muslim participated in the crime of 9/11, that doesn't mean you blame everyone who is a Muslim, just as you don't blame everyone who is a Christian after a Christian decides to blow up an abortion clinic. You blame the individuals responsible and not everyone from their religion, nationality, or ideology. 9/11 is being treated as a Muslim crime by some, and as a result, thousands of Muslims that had nothing to do with the attacks have been slaughtered. Treating 9/11 as a crime without the religious, national, and ideological undertones prevents more people from being blamed and slaughtered for a crime they didn't commit. It's as simple as that. We have been told repeatedly by people like Bill O'Reilly that Muslims killed us on 9/11. The 9/11 report dedicates many pages to Muslims and Islam. The hijackers' religious beliefs are mentioned as well. Hani Hanjour is described as, quote, rigorously observant Muslim, end quote. Muhammad Atta as, quote, religious, but not fanatically so. This would change, end quote. Ramzi bin al-Shibh thought, quote, the highest duty of every Muslim was to pursue jihad, and that the highest honor was to die during the jihad, end quote. Marwan al-Shihi had, quote, an evolution toward Islamic fundamentalism, end quote. Ziad Jarrah, quote, started living more strictly according to the Quran. He read brochures in Arabic about jihad, held forth to friends on the subject of holy war, and professed disaffection with his previous life and a desire not to leave the world, quote, in a natural way, end quote. As it turns out, there is reason to believe that the individuals we are told were the hijackers were not strict Muslims at all. And then it goes into a series of entries from historycommons.org that talks about some of the behaviors some of the alleged hijackers took part in, like drinking or gambling and stuff like that. Things that didn't equate to being a radical fundamentalist, Islamist, whatever you want to call it. You would think they would be as strict as possible if they were radical fundamentalists and so forth. Anyway, I'll provide the link to the article so you can see the entries at the description of this video. Whether Muslims were involved or not, that doesn't make it a Muslim crime. There have been stories over the years about some of the hijackers turning up alive. There have been other stories about stolen identities and so forth. Here is a clip from the film in their own words, the untold stories of the 9/11 family members addressing it.
I remember hearing reports of the hijackers that were listed on the FBI 19 were showing up, in places alive.
Last week, the FBI, having gathered evidence, confidently issued the 19 names of those who had seized the 4 planes. Many of them were from Saudi Arabia. Now it appears that some people with those names are still alive. The FBI is working on the possibility that the hijackers used stolen identities. All of this complicates linking the attacks to Osama bin Laden.
Take the case of these 3 men. Is this really Abdulaziz Al-Umari, the man in the airport picture? Not according to one Arabic newspaper who says it's spoken to a Mr. Al-Umari in Saudi Arabia. Then there's Walid Al-Shahri, another man named as a hijacker, but whose father says now lives in Morocco. And finally, there's also doubt about Khalid Al-Midar. Officials are thought to be looking at the possibility the name may have been an alias.
We asked Director Mueller, what's going on here? We hear that some of these people are actually, not who they were supposed to be. We're using aliases, we're using false identities. How can you continue to say that they were on the plane and that they're dead? Aren't you looking into what, who really was responsible here?
How many of the 19 are you certain of? Can you say that you're certain of the identities, that they did not pick up false identities of any of the 19?
Well, I think we are fairly certain on a number of them.
It is wrong to blame the entire entity known as Islam or Muslims or Arabs for the actions of a few. Now I want to talk about something called collective punishment. This definition is from Wiki, but it's not hard to verify. Quote, collective punishment is a form of retaliation whereby a suspected perpetrator's family members, friends, acquaintances, sect, neighbors, or entire ethnic group is targeted. The punished group may often have no direct association with the other individuals or groups or direct control over their actions. In times of war and armed conflict, collective punishment has resulted in atrocities and is a violation of the laws of war and the Geneva Convention. Historically, occupying powers have used collective punishment to retaliate against and deter attacks on their forces by resistance movements, such as destroying entire towns and villages which were believed to have harbored or aided such resistance movements. End quote. How many millions since 9/11 and in the name of 9/11 have we killed, wounded, renditioned, tortured, or displaced that had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11? The thought of those numbers and the people affected make me feel nausea. The hate needs to stop. All of the wars need to stop. And people need to become enlightened on this issue. By the way, there is no question that Donald Trump's racism and bigotry and unwillingness to come down hard on the racists and the bigots of this country is helping to foment and make it worse than it is. It's making people like them feel empowered, that it's supposedly the norm. And it's just horrid. He needs to be removed from office for many reasons, and none of which I think have anything to do with Russia. But that's just me.